All right, Kevin back with you for another episode of the $1 Million Relationships Podcast. And today I'm here with Chris Gilmour. Chris, welcome. So awesome to have you on the show today.
Yeah, it's great to follow up here, Kevin. So happy to
Oh,
be here.
yeah, I'll tell you, you and I, we had a great conversation before, and I want to start by just giving a shout out to Bradley Morris because he
Mm.
was the one that introduced you and I. And it's interesting, Bradley and I, we got connected because this other friend of mine, Miguel, had put a post on LinkedIn, and then Bradley ended up commenting on it, and then we got connected, and me and Bradley got to know each other a little bit, and then he introduced. He's like, Kev, you got to have Chris on your show. and so
Yeah,
and
Brad's
so
a natural connector and just a natural great guy. So,
Oh, he is, man. He's just such a great guy and just got a huge heart, man. That guy's got
mhm.
a huge heart for serving people, and yeah, for sure. And so, when somebody comes to you via an introduction like that, from somebody that you've already got a great relationship with, I mean, what a great way to meet somebody new. And of course, that's what this podcast is all about: is valuable relationships. And
Amazing. Well,
so.
I'll toast to that.
There you go. So we'll just start off by, you do something kind of unique and stuff, and we'll just start off there. What do you do and who do you serve, Chris?
Yeah, sure. I like to think it's pretty unique, you know.
Yep.
So maybe I'll start it this way. I wouldn't mind just giving you a little bit of background
Yeah,
context to
we
kind
can
of
go in the
understand it.
background for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. Were you a Western movies fan at all growing up?
Oh yeah, totally.
Westerns?
Especially Clint Eastwood stuff.
Nice, nice.
Fistful of dollars and that kind of stuff.
So it's funny. This might seem off course, but this actually is answering your question. So from a little age, I don't know why, but I was always fascinated by picture the guy on the horse that gets off and he's looking at the wildlife tracks down on the ground. And then he's the one that's saying, oh, the tracks are 2 days old and they went that way. And then he looks up at the weather, at the cloud and says, oh, it's going to rain tomorrow. We got to get moving. For whatever reason, I've been obsessed with that since a young age, that person that can just read all the signs of the natural landscape. So when I actually started out, I'm going to take you back about 25 years. I got into wilderness guiding and literally leading people on expeditions, keeping them safe in the backcountry.
Oh
And
wow.
I was obsessed with reading the signs of the natural world. So literally looking at wildlife tracks and not only telling you who they are, but what is the animal actually doing? What's the weather going to be tomorrow? The bird isn't just making a random sound. It's talking about the cougar that's sneaking through the woods or the weather about to change. So I was just fascinated by this as a young adult. So that was kind of like my old background, but it's kind of neat if you think about how this has evolved over the years and relates to what I would do today. Because I don't take people into the backcountry anymore, or I do,
Okay.
but not in the context that I used to. But what's really interesting if you think about it, wildlife tracking, so going and looking at patterns on the ground, actually teaches you some really foundational skill sets. So pattern recognition is one of them, being able to ask really, really good questions, and ultimately connect the dots between the intricate relationships out in the natural world. So that's my foundation, which I feel like that's like the background context right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
And it really shapes the way that I see the world today. So my work today, if I actually transition it to what I kind of do now, I kind
Uh-huh.
of work in three overlapping areas, I guess I would say. One of them is actually reconnecting people with human potential through our connection with the land. And I think
Okay.
a lot of people actually aren't aware. Like if you think about it, literally, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of human history, we had this really deep connection to the land. It was part of, how our psyche worked, how our culture evolved, all our systems. A lot of people have no context for that in the modern world that they've brought up. But I would argue that the skill sets that our ancestors learned are actually incredibly valuable and just as active today. Yet a lot of people have kind of lost that connection piece with the land. So one component of what I do is actually help, people literally repattern their brains with nature as one of the mentors in that. But then what is the application to that to the modern world? And I'll get into that in the next two pieces, but I'll just share that one of the applications is just around personal health and well-being. In this world of AI, tech, everything moving so fast, it's amazing how spending time in nature can calm our nervous system, right? And just, support general mental well-being, spiritual well-being, physical health on the land. So that's one piece.
Uh-huh.
But the other piece of this nature thing is neat how it rolls into kind of my modern day work. So the next area that I work in is what I've kind of termed holistic preparedness.
Okay.
And when I say holistic preparedness, I'm not talking about prepping here. I'm just talking about the reality that the world is always changing and there is new emerging threats that come about throughout
Mhm.
times, whether that's, increasing extreme weather and flooding and droughts, whether it's, financial disruptions, whether it shifts in literally the demographic of age structures across the planet. All of these things can impact our lives as individuals and can impact our organizations, our communities, all these different things, right?
Yeah.
So, one of the realms that I work in is actually helping kind of guide both individuals and organizations in adapting. So, I call it holistic preparedness. So, how do we become resilient as individuals, resilient as communities, resilient as businesses in a world where we don't really know what's around the next corner, and we're a little bit concerned about the changing dynamics. Maybe we've never seen this before in our lifetime, and I believe that there's a lot that's actually role modeled for us in nature. Nature is incredibly diverse. It is incredibly resilient by nature. And we can actually learn a lot from those patterns and actually apply them to our modern technological world, our modern lives, even if you live in the city. So I think that's an interesting angle that I bring to the preparedness realm. I do actually have a formal background in emergency and disaster preparedness, but I think what I bring in that's really unique is actually bridging it with this understanding of ecology that I do. And then the third layer that overlaps with that as well is what I call resilient design. So I'm naturally a bit of a systems thinker. And my wife and I love, a simple land-based life. We live on a little homestead. We grow a ton of food. I spend most of my day in front of a computer still because my work is actually in consulting, training, teaching.
Okay.
So I integrate with tech a lot, but I balance it out with this time on the land. But the other thing that's really influenced my work, I've done a lot of training around, how do you make sustainable agricultural systems and food systems on a local level? And again, when we think about, how do you make that locally sustainable, resilient, and hold up to challenges and disruptions, you can actually learn a lot from that can then be applied to, well, how do we do that for my life when I feel overwhelmed or I don't know what's around the next corner? How do we do this for our business when, we're in this unstable economy where we don't know what's going to happen with supply chains? We don't know what disaster, is there going to be another pandemic? What's going to come in? So ultimately, I kind of bridge these three different worlds that I think a lot of people would look at those as, individual things and not necessarily connect the dots on them. But that's kind of my passion is, bridging these different worlds into like a holistic skill set for being a resilient human or a resilient community or a resilient business in the context of our modern world.
Wow. Wow. Very, very intriguing. So what inspires you most about the work you get to do and the impact you get to make, Chris?
It's watching the ripples move out from it, supporting different organizations. Maybe I'll tell you that this is a neat kind of reflection I had. We actually talked about this briefly when we had our conversation before. But I was telling you, so I travel a fair bit for work. I go in, different organizations will bring me in. And often, I'm doing a mixture of helping them with, emergency preparedness planning. How would we adapt if, anything from like an active shooter coming on our campus to, a tornado to a fire, whatever it is. But then I bridge that out with the very human side of like, regulating your nervous system. How do we actually design our infrastructure to be more in balance with the ecosystem around it? So many modern disasters, nature is an element of them, right? It's water, it's fire, it's smoke, it's whatever. And I think through more intentional design that actually understands how ecology works, we can actually design more resilient infrastructure in the first place. So an organization will basically hire me to come in and we'll do a bit of an audit and say, how do we make your organization be more resilient? Now, the story though, and I think this piece is really neat. I was sitting there on the road, away from home for a couple of days, staying in a hotel, 10 o'clock at night, and I'm sitting in a little restaurant working on my notes. Okay. And funny, we had just been having these conversations around, so I had just met you through Badly, and I was listening to some of your podcasts, and we were having this conversation around, what is $1 million relationship and the importance of relationships. And I had this really neat epiphany that night because I was like, you know what? If I had like millions of dollars in the bank right now, I would still be sitting here by myself, away from my wife, in this restaurant at 10 o'clock at night, working on my notes to go and serve this community the next day, because I'm so inspired by the ripple that has. I go in and work with this community, and they're doing amazing work in the world, but I'm also making them more resilient to change and adaptability. And I thought, you know what? That relationship is literally worth more than $1 million to me. Like, you couldn't pay me $1 million to stop doing that. And it was actually, I don't know if you remember, I sent you an email right afterwards.
I totally remember that.
Yeah, I was like, Kevin, I just had this crazy epiphany the other day. I'm like, wow, like I have $1 million relationships. I don't think I'd ever really thought about it until like we had this conversation and I was thinking about your podcast name. So
yeah, and you know what it, not just discovery, but what a powerful distinction to make that like, wow, I really am doing my life's purpose, my life's calling. that I would not change a thing about this, that I just, and money's not going to change that. I just love doing what I do. I get so much joy, so much satisfaction from doing what I do that I wouldn't trade it for nothing.
Yeah, it really is a gift in
And
this world. I don't know
yeah,
if everybody can say that. So I'm super
well,
grateful
I,
to
I
say that.
guarantee you, not everybody can say that.
Mm.
So, I mean, I don't know what percentage of the population can say that, but it's definitely not all of them. That's for sure.
Yeah, and the
And
work genuinely feels meaningful, helping people
yeah,
connect to the land in this, technology overload time. And
yeah,
in this time where a lot of people do have some anxiety about some of the changes we're seeing in the world,
totally.
actually help them put practical solutions into place to adapt.
Yes,
It's
yeah.
truly rewarding work.
Yeah, and it just helps calm people's nervous systems, just give them just space to breathe.
Mhm.
And I remember, man, 11 years ago, we had a pretty major disaster right just a couple miles down the road from me. This town, little, I don't know if I'd call it a town. There's not a town there, but a community called Oso in
Oh, yeah.
Washington. There was that big, huge landslide there that
Oh, I
just
remember
wiped
hearing.
out a number of houses, killed a bunch of people, wiped out the road. The road was shut down for months while they rebuilt that whole area and stuff. And so everybody had to drive around, which was probably, I don't know, 2.5 hour drive. If you lived in
Mhm.
the communities up north of there, you had to go all the way around, and that was a lot further. And
Mhm.
but just dealing with that kind of stuff, I mean, because it happens a lot. Those kind of things happen a lot. And so, and I don't know, that, I mean, could things have done to maybe prevent that landslide? There's people that say yes, there could
Mhm.
have been things done differently. Things could have been managed differently or what have you and stuff. Um, but and you're right with just all the stuff that we see in the media these days. I haven't watched a newscast in, oh my gosh, probably since 05, 06. But you still see it on social media and all that kind of stuff. You still see stuff. But if somebody is watching the news on a regular basis, they are exposed to so much stuff that is just unsettling,
Mhm.
that and they just walk around in a state of being. So what would you say to people that are just like, yeah, you're right, Kev. I see a lot of this, and it has me really concerned. And like, what would you say to folks like that, Chris, that are in that kind of a spot?
Yeah, well, I from my experience, I find people tend to kind of fall into one of a few different ways that they process them. One of them is, literally just to stick your hand in the, like the ostrich in the sand there and just kind of pretend you don't see it and carry on. But what I find with that approach is often you still feel it and you kind of know it's there and you're ignoring it. And then that kind of builds up as this underlying anxiety, stress. And then it's like you're stressed, you're not happy, you're maybe even having health issues and you don't know why, but it's
Yep.
actually because you're ignoring the elephant in the room. So that's one direction people go. The other extreme of that is like the crazy prepper world that's just like, doomsday bunker,
Yep.
whatever kind of stuff that people get into, which is
Stock
not
up
my
on
jam at all.
everything and
Yeah,
prepare, and yeah, get ready for the world to end. And I'm going to be the lone survivor.
totally. Yeah, which is that kind of realm, right? So this is this term holistic preparedness. Maybe what I would answer to folks that are in that world is just to consider, what is a practical and holistic approach to that?
Okay.
And the one thing I'll share, I mentioned, that I'm fascinated with ancient cultures and the way that humans survived before modern technology.
Uh-huh.
Humans have overcome so many disasters and crazy scenarios in our history. Like we're born survivors. We're born to be resilient. And I think a lot of us have forgot that. So that's one thing is, reframing our story around that, and actually realizing what we're capable of. The other one I think about is, when we hear all of that on the news and we're inundated with it and we're overwhelmed with it, it feels like too much. So it's like, well, what are the actual really practical small steps we can take? This is one of the things I love. Like an organization will hire me and I come in and like the first couple of hours, like we're on a whiteboard and we're just painting out every possibility and every problem. And usually the first couple hours, people are totally overwhelmed. But what I actually love is actually being like, okay, now we have all a million different scenarios that could happen. We have all these systems. We found all these holes in your infrastructure where things could go wrong really badly if so and so event happened. And I'm using an organizational example, but you could apply this to an individual's life as well. You could apply it to your family unit, whatever it is. But then it's like, okay, well, once we've mapped that all out, what are the little steps that start connecting dots and start actually helping us take leaps forward in preparedness? And what's the low hanging fruit? And what you'll probably find is, if you do a couple of those low hanging fruit steps first, you actually feel good. It's like, oh, I'm actually a little less worried when I go to bed tonight because I've actually done something proactive about this. And I took a step that actually set me up to be a better situation for a number of different possible scenarios that came out. So instead of holding all of it at once, like the weight of that, it's like, okay, what are a few practical things that are right in front of me that I can actually do, feel good about? And then I like to help people kind of think in like short, middle, long-term plans with
Okay.
it. It's like, what are the easy things I could do in the next couple of weeks? And then what are the things I could do in the next year? And then what can I do over the next few years that
Okay.
start to build this resilience? So suddenly it doesn't feel like there's so much and it's so overwhelming. It's like a
Yes.
very clear roadmap that you're following. And
Yeah.
then the third layer, which really weaves in the holistic part, is how are you actually supporting your nervous system through all of this? And I think honestly, when I worked in professional emergency management, so I've done work, with governments and done big mock emergencies with like hospitals and stuff like
Okay.
that. And I think one of the layers that caused me to step out of doing it from that kind of level and actually go out on my own consulting is it wasn't weaving in this holistic piece around, how do humans perform under stress? And that is where the nature piece really comes in. What do we do to actually nurture our own nervous system and set ourselves up so that, we know how to calm ourselves. We know how to breathe if we're under stress. We know how to step away from a really crazy situation for a few minutes. Maybe you're even in the city and it's going to a park. Maybe it's going and sitting in a bench. Maybe it's going to the top of the high rise where you can just sit quietly and, watch a hawk fly around for a second. Calm your whole nervous system, turn off that mind that's going all over the place, center yourself. And then I find often when people do that, it's amazing the creative solutions that start to come through. And then you come back in. So through connection with the natural world, we learn to source creativity, calm our nervous system to actually solve some of these very complex challenges that are hard to do if we're very worked up and overwhelmed.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I hope that thread kind of connects
No,
between
that
all
is
those different pieces there.
really, really helpful for sure. Yeah. So I, I'm going to dig in a little bit deeper onto the kind of the work that you do. So what is it? What is a result that you have helped a client get? And you have to name names or anything. You can if you want, but you don't have to. What's a result you've helped a client get that you're just incredibly proud of, Chris?
Ooh. Yeah, I'll take you back to one of the older ones from my early guiding days. And this
Okay.
isn't necessarily the work that I'm doing today so much, but
Okay.
in my early guiding days, in my early 20s, I used to actually work with youth at risk a lot.
All right.
And I would take them, literally like young offenders, and I would take them into the woods for like 10 days. And we would basically push
Okay.
their limits, paddling whitewater rivers, doing long hikes. And out in nature, of course, you face a lot of adversity. Some of the shenanigans that you would get up into the city, it's not really a choice when you're out there. There's nobody to make you dinner. If you get lost, you're lost. If you get cold, you're out there. You got to deal with it. There's no safety net, right? So I saw some major, major transformations, working with youth and adults in deep wilderness environments growing up. But there's one kid in particular that really stands out to me, going through a really tough time, had a really bad problem with alcohol. And for whatever reason, he just really, I could tell he was super inspired by what I was bringing to him, the tracking, the survival, all the stuff I was going to do. And we kind of stayed in touch, after I left this program. And there's a handful of the youth that I've stayed in touch with over the years. And, maybe he disappeared for a couple of years, but I ran into him a couple of years down the road and he was really not doing well, really gone down the rabbit hole with alcohol. Just his life was a mess, but I knew he loved the outdoors. And, speaking of the relationships piece and relationships changing lives, because of my work in the outdoors, I knew a bunch of the park wardens at a local park, provincial park. So I actually went and talked to one of the park wardens and basically said, hey, I know this kid. I know he's super tough. He's a really hard worker and he's got a lot of problems. Is there any way you would consider taking him on for a summer and just putting him in the backcountry? So I basically set him up for his first kind of like real job with this guy, took him away from alcohol where they were literally going in and working in the backcountry, like getting dropped off by float planes and building
Wow.
trails and building campsites in the backcountry. So
Wow.
long story forward, he went through ups and downs for a number of years, but that was a turning point in his life. And I think he would identify that. I still am in touch with him today. And this is the beautiful part, Kevin. So he is a father now, and he works with youth for a living now, basically
Wow.
helping youth at risk through nature connection get their lives back on track. So he's basically doing what I did for
Yep.
him now
Wow.
as an adult. Hasn't I think it's
Wow.
like I want to say he's 7 years sober right now
Okay.
since he's had his last drink. He's got a daughter. He's so proud to be a father, and he's so proud of his work with youth, which is the context that I started working with him in. So honestly, I'm probably more proud of that one than I am any recent achievement that I've
Yeah.
made.
What an amazing story right there. And like, wow, how rewarding that must be for you, and to just be able to have that kind of impact on somebody that years later, that now they too are out there making their impact in this world too. And helping others in much the same way that you help them, you know. I mean,
Yeah,
man,
and you know what's
what a beautiful story that is. I
Yeah,
love
and
it.
it speaks to the power of relationships too, because it
Yeah.
wasn't just me that helped him. Like
Yeah.
I introduced him because I don't have to hold everything. Like, when he was really a mess, I didn't necessarily know exactly what to do with him. I just knew I wanted to help him.
Yeah.
And then I actually thought, well, who in my network could help with the next step? And I knew this park warden, and it just came to me. So I actually introduced him to somebody, the way that I've been introduced to people that have changed the course of my life, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. 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 So that park warden too has had just had such a powerful hand in all of this, and giving him that first job and just letting him have that experience that was just in alignment with who he really was and just how he wanted to show up too and stuff, and just gave him a sense of purpose. And yeah, that is beautiful. That is beautiful. Well, so now that we've got some context set here around the work that you do, I want to switch gears just a little bit. And I want to start like leaning towards the relationship side of this conversation a little deeper. And so I'll start off by asking you, have you, Chris, ever been introduced to a person or persons who completely changed the course of your life or your business, so much so that much of what you have today would not be possible if not for this person or persons? And I'm just really excited to hear your story and your experience around this topic of relationships.
Yeah, I love that question. I've been listening to a few of your podcasts lately, and I love listening to people answer that one.
Yeah, yeah, me
Yeah,
too.
yeah, I bet it's a fun one to ask, eh? I mean, I can think of a whole bunch of people, but I think there's one person in particular that was absolutely pivotal to the way that I think
Okay.
and how I run my business today and the work that I do.
All
And
right.
it is a really interesting story arc because what I started off doing with him, would have never guessed that would relate to what I do today. And I still stay in touch with this person.
Wow.
So again, he came into my life in my early 20s.
Okay.
So, going back, it's probably 25, 30 years ago when I was introduced to this person. And I had a friend that had basically gone down and done a course with him down in Washington, and was basically like, hey, Chris, I met this guy. I found him so inspiring. You need to meet him too. And his name was John Young.
Okay.
He's written a number of books. I think he's done a TED Talk. He's founded a couple of different schools, mostly in this work of land connection that I'm talking about, getting
Okay.
people back outdoors and recognizing the profound benefit in that. But what's really interesting about the story, so when I first started to go to learn from John, at first I thought I was going there to learn how, basically, going back to the Western story, like I went there to be like, okay, I want to learn how to be that guy on the horse, the tracker, I want to learn how to
Uh-huh.
read footprints on the ground for people and animals, and how to read the weather and what are the birds saying, and how to live off the land and what can you eat in the woods and all that kind of stuff. And John did teach that stuff at the time, but that was really the surface level of it. And I don't think I actually realized when I started that. I think John even saw that as the surface level,
Okay.
because he recognized that, this is actually like kind of part of the human DNA, part of our ancestry. And, we live in this modern world where we don't necessarily need the practical parts of those skills. But I think John recognized that they actually train us, they train our brains in a way, they train our body in a way that's actually as relevant as ever in the modern world. So he started off teaching me, literally to track deer and to track wildlife. But what I realized later, what he was actually teaching me how to do was how to ask really good questions, how to track relationships between different species, how to track relationships across ecology, and how to see patterns. And then how do you take the patterns that you learn, between, let's say, how a deer interacts with the forest, and then apply it to patterns between how humans interact with each other or how people interact with each other within a business.
Okay.
Or, I referenced holistic preparedness before, that a lot of disasters, if we actually had better environmental design, the disaster might not have been that bad in the first place.
Mhm.
So it started off literally tracking deer in the forest, and it led to me going down this deep rabbit hole of like, what shapes the way that humans see patterns, and what are the principles of that can be applied to some of the biggest challenges of our modern times. And it's kind of funny, a question somewhere along that journey that popped up for me. I was literally teaching wilderness survival courses like 15 years ago, taking people on the land. How do you live off the land? And I started asking this question. So it's like, seems like there's some really core principles to how this works. And I started thinking, what does it take to apply this now on a community level, on a regional level, on a civilizational level? And that's when I actually decided to go back to school and start studying emergency and disaster management. And it was actually funny to think that, wilderness survival would actually be incredibly applicable to working with a municipality or a province or a hospital on how to be more resilient for disasters. But it's the same kind of pattern thinking. So to relate this all back, John taught me pattern thinking. He taught me systems thinking, but he used nature as the muse. And I think he was incredibly intentional about that. And he's very passionate about nature, just like I am.
Yep.
But it's not necessarily about being a deer tracker. It's actually about tracking patterns across the world, whether you're sitting in front of a computer, whether you're working with a staff team, or whether you're enjoying a weekend away with some friends, just trying to decompress. And there's profound value in that. There's maybe one other piece I'll hit on that I think is really important too.
Okay.
So I went back a couple years later, and I think because John could see that I was really applying myself to the wilderness stuff, he was kind of like, okay, well, now it's time to like go a little deeper with you on this as a mentor. And he opened up this idea that, culture could actually be something that we think about intentionally. And that was actually in my early 20s, just like a mind-blowing concept to me, culture was to me just something you were born into. And he kind of planted the seed in my mind that, if we want to have healthy people, if we want healthy families, if we want healthy communities, if we want healthy businesses, we may want to think about what is the culture that's actually holding those things, that allows them to be healthy in the first place. And it was this, again, tracking the deer and pattern thinking that then got me thinking about, and John mentored me as well, like what are patterns across different cultures that actually create healthy cultures? What creates healthy people that are just genuinely good people that want to give back to their community? That's a type of pattern recognition, right? And you can go to distinctly different cultures and find patterns that show how do they raise empowered youth that actually are good people and truly care. So it's so funny, to bring this all around. John taught me to track deer, but that's led me down this deep rabbit hole that basically led to how I do my work today. Working with people, and I started off guiding people in the wilderness, but it's now led to me consulting with individuals on how to live more deep, resilient, meaningful lives, and how to be better prepared for the unknown. And then I also do that for businesses, even organizations, municipalities, with those same kind of questions. What does it look? Let's look at all the patterns and think about that through the lens of resiliency, but also health. Healthy humans are more resilient. Healthy ecosystems are more resilient. Healthy businesses are more resilient. So how do we put those all together? And that's kind of, my sacred question that I hold in the world and my obsession in life, weaving all those pieces together.
Wow.
And that was a gift from John. One relationship started that off. There's no way I would be having this conversation with you today or running my business the way I'm doing it today if I had not met John. Like, completely changed the course of my life, that relationship. And then, the way I was able to support that young youth at risk, I wouldn't have been able to do that, be the relationship for him if John wasn't that relationship for me first.
Yeah. Wow. That, when we really start looking at this and the impact that relationships have not only had on our lives personally, like you just shared this relationship with you and John, and how that's impacted you personally and your business and how you do what you do today and in your business. But then also, like you said, helping this young man who you wouldn't have been able to help him had not John helped you in the first place and stuff. And now how many other lives have been impacted by this young man because of the work that he's now doing with youth and stuff too? How a lot of other people's life, and not just the youth. I mean, my goodness, how many people close to him? I don't know, like relationships he has with brothers, sisters, relatives, just people in his life that are now different because he got the opportunity to meet you and you got him going down this path instead of the other path that he was going down, and how those relationships are dramatically different today because of, when we really start looking at the ripple effect of all this, it kind of is mind blowing, and we'll never know the true ripple impact of it, but it's just like, wow, look at what's happened, and, pretty awesome.
That's what a tracker is to me, Kevin. When I first started learning about tracking, it was about like, oh, what animal was it that made this print on the ground? But now tracking for me is actually tracking those ripples across the landscape, tracking them across time, tracking them across culture, tracking them across businesses, people. That's what being a tracker is actually just seeing the patterns, the ripples. And then it's like, what do we do with that that's actually helpful, valuable, useful in our modern context?
Yes.
It's not actually about going back. When I started out, I wanted to go back and be that guy on the horse. That's actually not my mission anymore. My mission is actually about living here in the modern world. And,
Uh-huh.
and what can we learn from that ancient, tracker on the horse that's actually as relevant as ever to being good, resourceful, resilient people in our modern context with the modern challenges that we face today.
It's interesting because you explaining that, I mean, in many ways, because I put people together. Specifically, pretty much mostly entrepreneurs, bringing the right entrepreneurs together to
Mm,
have the right conversations for the right reasons, and that's when the magic happens.
it's an
And
ecosystem.
yeah, yeah, and it's kind of like what you're talking about, that tracking capability of, and I've always just done it just by being in conversation with people is what spurs it on for me. I mean, and I love talking with entrepreneurs. I love hearing about what they're working on, what they're jazzed and inspired about, what challenges they're up against, what opportunities that they're trying to take advantage of. And I just automatically default to, like, who do I know that might be able to help them
Mm,
with whatever it is that they're telling me about? And then I get to make those introductions and stuff. And I've always done it from that standpoint. But now I'm looking at this, and more recently, I mean, I've created a whole lot of relationship capital and trust with a whole lot of the right people over the last
mm,
22, 23 years. And so I'm looking at all these relationships and it's like, wow, what if we were to put them into some kind of a database that it was searchable and that I could,
mm.
and just become more effective, not having to do it all just from conversations and thinking, but like being able to have a resource to go look into and dig deeper into how much more effective would I be if I had that. And it's got me pretty jazzed thinking about, because like we're in the process of just putting that together, and I'm just like, wow, what will you be capable of with that? And so, and it's like it just gets us jazzed thinking about. I mean, like, I'm incredibly grateful for right here, right now, in this very present moment, right here, just for everything. But I'm also really jazzed and excited about the future too. And
Well,
so,
again, I'll toast to both those with you, Kevin. I feel the same way.
yeah, yeah. Well, so for anyone who might be listening to this and thinking, man, Kev, I really like Chris. I love who he is. I love how he shows up. And maybe they're thinking like, man, I'd really like to talk with him and find out more about the work he does. Or I know somebody else that it would make sense to connect with Chris. Any websites, any resources we can share with folks?
Yeah, you could just go over to my website. It's chrisoutdoors.ca. I'm up in
Okay.
Canada, so make sure
Okay.
you put .ca.com. And if you went to my consulting page specifically, that might give you a better idea of kind of some of the
Okay.
what I do today. I'll be honest, the website's a little bit outdated. It doesn't fully represent what I do today. But that's where you can find my contact info. There's a contact us form on there. You can kind of
Okay.
get an idea of what I do for both individuals. I got some courses on there, and what I do for organizations. So yeah, chrisoutdoors.ca. / consulting if you want to see that.
Okay.
And yeah, just reach out to me. Send me an email. Yeah, fill in the contact form. I'd love having these conversations with folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Any last thing that you feel led to share before we call it a wrap, Chris?
Mm, oh, good question. Maybe just one piece that kind of relates to this unique vision that kind of I hold in the world right now in the work. I love the intersection of these two things, and to me, they are not contradicting to each other. I feel like I actually love technology. I think technology has the ability to solve all kinds of logistical challenges that we have right now. I think sometimes we forget, though, that technology still lives within an ecology, an ecosystem. And I'm a big proponent of all people reclaiming their understanding of ecology to make a truly resilient ecosystem for us all to live in and a healthier ecosystem for live in. I think technology can solve a lot of logistical problems. I think nature can actually solve a lot of innately human ones. And especially for the youth and kids today, I think getting them outdoors on the land in their bodies, listening to the birds, looking at the tracks, sleeping in shelters, whatever it is, to actually feel that is as important as ever, and literally does build the kind of resiliency, the belief in self, the ability to self-regulate emotions, some of these skill sets that are actually very much needed in a world of AI and disruption. So
Yeah.
maybe just drawing the line between ecology and technology would be the thing I would like to leave people for, and one of the things that I feel super passionate about bringing to the world.
Yeah. Well, once again, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation today, just share from your part, and I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you, and I'm excited to get this out there and share it with folks. So thanks so much, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Kevin. And yeah, another shout out to Bradley. Thanks for connecting us. If you're listening, Brad.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
John. Thanks, John. You're amazing.